The Earth Kasina, Pathavikasina Nidesa. He should avoid a monastery unfavorable to the development of concentration and go to live in one that is favorable. In the first place, one who finds it convenient to live with the teacher in the same monastery can live there while he is making certain of the meditation subject. If it is inconvenient there, he can live in another monastery, a suitable one, a quarter or a half or even a whole league distant. In that case, when he finds he is in doubt about or has forgotten some passage in the meditation subject, then he should do the duties in the monastery in good time and set out afterwards, going for alms on the way and arriving at the teacher's dwelling place after his meal. He should make certain about the meditation subject that day, in the teacher's presence. Next day, after paying homage to the teacher, he should go for alms on his way back, and so he can return to his own dwelling place without fatigue. But one who finds no convenient place within even a league should clarify all difficulties about the meditation subject and make quite sure it has been properly attended to. Then he can even go far away and, avoiding a monastery unfavorable to development of concentration, live in one that is favorable. The 18 faults of a monastery. Herein, one that is unfavorable has any one of 18 faults. These are largeness, newness, dilapidatedness, a nearby road, a pond, edible leaves, flowers, fruits, famousness, a nearby city, nearby timber trees, nearby arable fields, presence of incompatible persons, a nearby port of entry, nearness to the border countries, nearness to the frontier of a kingdom, unsuitability, lack of good friends. One with any of these faults is not favorable. He should not live there. Why? Firstly, people with varying aims collect in a large monastery. They conflict with each other and so neglect the duties. The Enlightenment tree terrace, etc., remain unwept. The water for drinking and washing is not set out. So if he thinks, I shall go to the alms resort village for alms, and takes his bowl and robe and sets out, perhaps he sees that the duties have not been done, or that a drinking water pot is empty, and so the duty has to be done by him unexpectedly. Drinking water must be maintained. By not doing it, he would commit a wrongdoing in the breach of a duty. But if he does it, he loses time. He arrives too late at the village and gets nothing because the alms-giving is finished. Also, when he goes into retreat, he is distracted by the loud noises of novices and young bhikkhus and by acts of the community. However, he can live in a large monastery where all the duties are done and where there are none of the other disturbances. In a new monastery, there is much new building activity. People criticize someone who takes no part in it. But he can live in such a monastery where the bhikkhus say, let the venerable one do the ascetic's duties as much as he likes. We shall see to the building work. In a dilapidated monastery, there is much that needs repair. People criticize someone who does not see about the repairing of at least his own lodging. When he sees to the repairs, his meditation subject suffers. In a monastery with a nearby road, by a main street, visitors keep arriving night and day. He has to give up his own lodging to those who come late, and he has to go and live at the root of a tree or on top of a rock. And next day it is the same. So there is no opportunity to practice his meditation subject. But he can live in one where there is no such disturbance by visitors. A pond is a rock pool. Numbers of people come there for drinking water. Pupils of city-dwelling elders supported by the royal family come to do dyeing work. When they ask for vessels, wood, tubs, etc., they must be shown where these things are. So he is kept all the time on the alert. If he goes with his meditation subject to sit by day, where there are many sorts of edible leaves, then women vegetable gatherers, singing as they pick leaves nearby, endanger his meditation subject by disturbing it with sounds of the opposite sex. And where there are many sorts of flowering shrubs in bloom, there is the same danger too. Where there are many sorts of fruits such as mangoes, rose apples, and jackfruits, people who want fruits come and ask for them, and they get angry if he does not give them any, or they take them by force. When walking in the monastery in the evening, he sees them and asks, "Why do you do so, lay followers?" They abuse him as they please and even try to evict him. When he lives in a monastery that is famous and renowned in the world, like Dakinagiri Hatikuchi, Setiagiri, or Sitalapabata, there are always people coming who want to pay homage to him, supposing that he is an arahant, which inconveniences him. But if it suits him, he can live there at night and go elsewhere by day. In one with a nearby city, objects of the opposite sex come into focus. Women pot carriers go by bumping into him with their jars and giving no room to pass. Also important people spread out carpets in the middle of the monastery and sit down nur. One with nearby timber trees where there are timber trees and osiers useful for making framework is inconvenient because of the wood gatherers there, like the gatherers of branches and fruits already mentioned. If there are trees in a monastery, people come and cut them down to build houses with. When he has come out of his meditation room in the evening and is walking up and down in the monastery, if he sees them and asks, "Why do you do so, lay followers?" they abuse him as they please and even try to evict him. People make use of one with nearby arable fields, quite surrounded by fields. They make a threshing floor in the middle of the monastery itself. They thresh corn there, dry it in the forecourts, and cause great inconvenience. And where there is extensive property belonging to the community, the monastery attendants impound cattle belonging to families and deny the water supply to their crops. Hen people bring an ear of paddy and show it to the community saying, "Look at your monastery attendant's work." For one reason or another, he has to go to the portals of the king or the king's ministers. This matter of property belonging to the community is included by a monastery that is near arable fields. Presence of incompatible persons, where there are bhikkhus living who are incompatible and mutually hostile. When they clash and it is protested, "Venerable sirs, do not do so," they exclaim. "We no longer count now that this refuse rag wearer has come." One with a nearby water port of entry or land port of entry is made inconvenient by people constantly arriving respectively by ship or by caravan and crowding round, asking for space or for drinking water or salt. In the case of one near the border countries, people have no trust in the Buddha there. In one near the frontier of a kingdom, there is fear of kings. For perhaps one king attacks that place, thinking, "It does not submit to my rule," and the other does likewise, thinking, "It does not submit to my rule." A bhikkhu lives there when it is conquered by one king and when it is conquered by the other. Then they suspect him of spying, and they bring about his undoing. Unsuitability is that due to the risk of encountering visible data of the opposite sex as objects or to haunting by non-human beings. Here is a story. An elder lived in a forest, it seems. Then an ogress stood in the door of his leaf hut and sang. The elder came out and stood in the door. She went to the end of the walk and sang. The elder went to the end of the walk. She stood in a chasm 100 fathoms deep and sang. The elder recoiled. Then she suddenly grabbed him, saying, "Venerable sir, it is not just one or two of the likes of you I have eaten." Lack of good friends. Where it is not possible to find a good friend as a teacher or the equivalent of a teacher or a preceptor or the equivalent of a preceptor, the lack of good friends there is a serious fault. One that has any of those 18 faults should be understood as unfavorable. And this is said in the commentaries. A large abode, a new abode, one tumbling down, one near a road, one with a pond, or leaves, or flowers, or fruits, or one that people seek. In cities, among timber, fields, where people quarrel, in a port, in borderlands, on frontiers, unsuitableness, and no good friend. These are the 18 instances a wise man needs to recognize and give them full as wide a berth as any footpad-hunted road. The 5 factors of the resting place. One that has the 5 factors beginning with not too far from and not too near to. The alms resort is called favorable, for this is said by the Blessed One. And how is a lodging 5 factors, bhikkhus? Here, bhikkhus, A lodging is not too far, not too near, and has a path for going and coming. It is little frequented by day with little sound and few voices by night. There is little contact with gadflies, flies, wind, burning sun, and creeping things. One who lives in that lodging easily obtains robes, alms food, lodging, and the requisite of medicine as cure for the sick. In that lodging there are elder bhikkhus living who are learned, versed in the scriptures, observers of the Dhamma, observers of the Vinaya, observers of the codes. And when from time to time one asks them questions, "How is this, venerable sir? What is the meaning of this?" then those venerable ones reveal the unrevealed, explain the unexplained, and remove doubt about the many things that raise doubts. This bhikkhus is how a lodging has 5 factors. These are the details for the clause. After that, he should avoid a monastery unfavorable to the development of concentration and go to live in one that is favorable. Then he should sever the lesser impediments. One living in such a favorable monastery should sever any minor impediments that he may still have. That is to say, long head hair, nails, and body hair should be cut. Mending and patching of old robes should be done, or those that are soiled should be dyed. If there is a stain on the bowl should be baked. The bed, chair, etc. should be cleaned up. These are the details for the clause. Then he should sever the lesser impediments. Detailed instructions for development. Now with the clause, and not overlook any of the directions for development, the time has come for the detailed exposition of all meditation subjects, starting with the Earth Kasina. The Earth Kasina. When a bhikkhu has thus severed the lesser impediments, then, on his return from his alms round, after his meal and after he has got rid of drowsiness due to the meal, he should sit down comfortably in a secluded place and apprehend the sign in earth that is either made up or not made up. For this is said, one who is learning the Earth Kasina apprehends the sign in earth that is either made up or not made up, that is bounded, not unbounded, limited, not unlimited, with a periphery, not without a periphery, circumscribed, not uncircumscribed, either the size of a bushel, suppa, or the size of a saucer. He sees to it that that sign is well apprehended, well attended to, well defined. Having done that, and seeing its advantages and perceiving it as a treasure, building up respect for it, making it dear to him, he anchors his mind to that object, thinking, "Surely in this way I shall be freed from aging and death." Secluded from sense desires, he enters upon and dwells in the first jhana. Herein, when in a previous becoming a man has gone forth into homelessness in the dispensation, or outside it, with the rishis going forth, and has already produced the jhana tetrad or pentad on the Earth Kasina, and so has such merit and the support of past practice of jhana as well, then the sign arises in him on earth that is not made up, that is to say, on a plowed area or on a threshing floor, as in the elder Malacca's case. It seems that while that venerable one was looking at a plowed area, the sign arose in him the size of that area. He extended it and attained the jhana pentad. Then, by establishing insight with the jhana as the basis for it, he reached arahantship, making an Earth Kasina. But when a man has had no such previous practice, he should make a kasina, guarding against the 4 faults of a kasina, and not overlooking any of the directions for the meditation subject learnt from the teacher. Now, the 4 faults of the Earth Kasina are due to the intrusion of blue, yellow, red, or white. So instead of using clay of such colors, he should make the kasina of clay like that in the stream of the Ganga, which is the color of the dawn. And he should make it not in the middle of the monastery in a place where novices, etc., are about, but on the confines of the monastery, in a screened place, either under an overhanging rock or in a leaf hut. He can make it either portable or as a fixture. Of these, a portable one should be made by tying rags of leather or matting onto 4 sticks and smearing thereon a disc of the size already mentioned, using clay picked clean of grass, roots, gravel, and sand, and well kneaded. At the time of the preliminary work, it should be laid on the ground and looked at. A fixture should be made by knocking stakes into the ground in the form of a lotus calyx, lacing them over with creepers. If the clay is insufficient, then other clay should be put underneath, and a disc, a span, and 4 fingers across, made on top of that, with the quite pure dawn-colored clay. For it was with reference only to measurement that it was said above, either the size of a bushel or the size of a saucer. But that is bounded, not unbounded, was said to show its delimitedness. So, having thus made it delimited and of the size prescribed, he should scrape it down with a stone trowel. A wooden trowel turns it a bad color, so that should not be employed, and make it as even as the surface of a drum. Then he should sweep the place out and have a bath. On his return, he should seat himself on a well-covered chair with legs a span and 4 fingers high, prepared in a place that is 2.5 cubits, that is, 2.5 times elbow to fingertip, from the Kasina disc. For the Kasina does not appear plainly to him if he sits further off than that. And if he sits nearer than that, faults in Takashioa appear. If he sits higher up, he has to look at it with his neck bent, and if he sits lower down, his knees ache. So after seating himself in the way stated, he should review the dangers in sense desires in the way beginning. Sense desires give little enjoyment, and arouse longing for the escape from sense desires, for the renunciation that is the means to the surmounting of all suffering. He should next arouse joy of happiness by recollecting the special qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, then awe by thinking, "Now, this is the way of renunciation entered upon by all Buddhas, Pachaka Buddhas, and noble disciples," and then eagerness by thinking, "In this way I shall surely come to know the taste of the bliss of seclusion." After that, he should open his eyes moderately, apprehend the sign, and so proceed to develop it. If he opens his eyes too wide, they get fatigued and the disc becomes too obvious, which prevents the sign becoming apparent to him. If he opens them too little, the disc is not obvious enough, and his mind becomes drowsy, which also prevents the sign becoming apparent to him. So he should develop it by apprehending the sign, nimitta, keeping his eyes open moderately, as if he were seeing the reflection of his face, mukha nimitta, on the surface of a looking glass. The color should not be reviewed. The characteristics should not be given attention, but rather, while not ignoring the color, attention should be given by setting the mind on the name concept as the most outstanding mental datum, relegating the color to the position of a property of its physical support. That conceptual state can be called by anyone he likes among the names for earth, Patavi, such as earth, Pathavi, the great one, Mahi, the friendly one, Medini, ground, Bhumi, the provider of wealth, Vasudha, the bearer of wealth, Vasudhara, etc., whichever suits his manner of perception. Still, earth is also a name that is obvious, so it can be developed with the obvious one by saying earth, earth. It should be adverted to now with eyes open, now with eyes shut, and he should go on developing it in this way 100 times, 1,000 times, and even more than that, until the learning sign arises. While he is developing it in this way, it comes into focus as he adverts with his eyes shut exactly as it does with his eyes open, then the learning sign is said to have been produced. After its production, he should no longer sit in that place. He should return to his own quarters and go on developing it sitting there. But in order to avoid the delay of foot washing, a pair of single-soled sandals and a walking stick are desirable. Then, if the new concentration vanishes through some unsuitable encounter, he can put his sandals on, take his walking stick, and go back to the place to reapprehend the sign there. When he returns, he should seat himself comfortably and develop it by reiterated reaction to it and by striking at it with thought and applied thought. As he does so, the hindrances eventually become suppressed, the defilements subside, the mind becomes concentrated with access concentration, and the counterpart sign arises. The difference between the earlier learning sign and the counterpart sign is this. In the learning sign, any fault in the kasina is apparent, but the counterpart sign appears as if breaking out from the learning sign, and 100 times, 1,000 times more, purified, like a looking-glass disk drawn from its case, like a mother-of-pearl dish well washed, like the moon's disk coming out from behind a cloud, like cranes against a thundercloud. But it has neither color nor shape, for if it had, it would be cognizable by the eye, gross, susceptible of comprehension, by insight, and stamped with the 3 characteristics. But it is not like that, for it is born only of perception in one who has obtained concentration, being a mere mode of appearance. But as soon as it arises, the hindrances are quite suppressed, the defilements subside, and the mind becomes concentrated in access concentration. Now, concentration is of 2 kinds, that is to say, access concentration and absorption concentration. The mind becomes concentrated in 2 ways, that is, on the plane of access and on the plane of obtainment. Herein, the mind becomes concentrated on the plane of access by the abandonment of the hindrances, and on the plane of obtainment by the manifestation of the jhana factors. The difference between the 2 kinds of concentration is this. The factors are not strong in access. It is because they are not strong that, when access has arisen, the mind now makes the sign its object and now re-enters the life continuum, just as when a young child is lifted up and stood on its feet, it repeatedly falls down on the ground. But the factors are strong in absorption. It is because they are strong that when absorption concentration has arisen, the mind, having once interrupted the flow of the life continuum, carries on with a stream of profitable impulsion for a whole night and for a whole day, just as a healthy man, after rising from his seat, could stand for a whole day. The arousing of the counterpart sign, which arises together with access concentration, is very difficult. Therefore, if he is able to arrive at absorption in that same session by extending the sign, it is good. If not, then he must guard the sign diligently as if it were the fetus of a wheel-turning monarch, world ruler. So guard the sign, nor count the cost, and what is gained will not be lost. Who fails to have this guard maintained will lose each time what he has gained. Herein the way of guarding it is this: abode, resort, and speech, and person, the food, the climate, and the posture. Eschew these 7 different kinds, whenever found unsuitable. But cultivate the suitable. For one perchance so doing finds, he need not wait too long until absorption shall his wish fulfill. Herein an abode is unsuitable if, while he lives in it, the unrisen sign does not arise in him or is lost when it arises, and where unestablished mindfulness fails to become established, and the unconcentrated mind fails to become concentrated. That is suitable in which the sign arises and becomes confirmed, in which mindfulness becomes established and the mind becomes concentrated, as in the elder Padhanya Tissa, resident at Nagapabata. So if a monastery has many abodes, he can try them one by one, living in each for 3 days, and stay on where his mind becomes unified. For it was due to suitability of abode that 500 bhikkhus reached arahantship, while still dwelling in the Lesser Naga cave in Tambapani Island, Sri Lanka, after apprehending their meditation subject there. There is no counting the stream-enterers who have reached arahantship there after reaching the noble plane elsewhere. So too in the monastery of Chittalapabata and others. An alms resort village lying to the north or south of the lodging, not too far, within 1 kosa and a half, and where alms food is easily obtained, is suitable. The opposite kind is unsuitable. Speech, that included in the 32 kinds of aimless talk, is unsuitable, for it leads to the disappearance of the sign. But talk based on the 10 examples of talk is suitable, though even that should be discussed with moderation. Person, one not given to aimless talk, who has the special qualities of virtue, etc., by acquaintanceship with whom the unconcentrated mind becomes concentrated, or the concentrated mind becomes more so, is suitable. One who is much concerned with his body, who is addicted to aimless talk, is unsuitable, for he only creates disturbances like muddy water added to clear water. And it was owing to one such as this that the attainments of the young bhikkhu who lived at Kotapabata vanished, not to mention the sign. Food, sweet food suits one, sour food another. Climate, a cool climate suits one, a warm one another. So when he finds that by using certain food or by living in a certain climate he is comfortable, or his unconcentrated mind becomes concentrated, or his concentrated mind becomes more so, then that food or that climate is suitable. Any other food or climate is unsuitable. Postures. Walking suits. One, standing or sitting or lying down suits another. So he should try them, like the abode, for 3 days each. And that posture is suitable in which his unconcentrated mind becomes concentrated, or his concentrated mind becomes more so. Any other should be understood as unsuitable, so he should avoid the 7 unsuitable kinds and cultivate the suitable. For when he practices in this way, assiduously cultivating the sign, then he need not wait too long until absorption shall his wish fulfill. However, if this does not happen while he is practicing in this way, then he should have recourse to the 10 kinds of skill in absorption. Here is the method. Skill in absorption needs to be dealt with in 10 aspects: making the basis clean, maintaining balanced faculties. Skill in the sign. He exerts the mind on an occasion when it should be exerted. He restrains the mind on an occasion when it should be restrained. He encourages the mind on an occasion when it should be encouraged. He looks on at the mind with equanimity when it should be looked on at with equanimity. Avoidance of unconcentrated persons. Cultivation of concentrated persons. Resoluteness upon that concentration. Herein, making the basis clean is cleansing the internal and the external basis. For when his head hair, nails, and body hair are long, or when the body is soaked with sweat, then the internal basis is unclean and unpurified. But when an old, dirty, smelly robe is worn, or when the lodging is dirty, then the external basis is unclean and unpurified. When the internal and external bases are unclean, then the knowledge in the consciousness and consciousness concomitants that arise is unpurified, like the light of a lamp's flame that arises with an unpurified lamp bowl, wick, and oil as its support. Formations do not become evident to one who tries to comprehend them with unpurified knowledge, and when he devotes himself to his meditation subject, it does not come to growth, increase, and fulfillment. But when the internal and external bases are clean, then the knowledge in the consciousness and consciousness concomitants that arise is clean and purified, like the light of a lamp's flame that arises with a purified lamp bowl, wick, and oil as its support. Formations become evident to one who tries to comprehend them with purified knowledge, and as he devotes himself to his meditation subject, it comes to growth, increase, and fulfillment. Maintaining balanced faculties is equalizing the 5 faculties of faith and the rest. For if his faith faculty is strong and the others weak, then the energy faculty cannot perform its function of exerting, the mindfulness faculty its function of establishing, the concentration faculty its function of not distracting, and the understanding faculty its function of seeing. So in that case, the faith faculty should be modified either by reviewing the individual essences of the states concerned, that is, the objects of attention, or by not giving them attention in the way in which the faith faculty became too strong. And this is illustrated by the story of the elder Vakali. Then if the energy faculty is too strong, the faith faculty cannot perform its function of resolving, nor can the rest of the faculties perform their several functions. So in that case, the energy faculty should be modified by developing tranquility, and so on. And this should be illustrated by the story of the elder Sona, so too with the rest. For it should be understood that when any one of them is too strong, the others cannot perform their several functions. However, what is particularly recommended is balancing faith with understanding and concentration with energy. For one strong in faith and weak in understanding has confidence uncritically and groundlessly. One strong in understanding and weak in faith errs on the side of cunning and is as hard to cure as one sick of a disease caused by medicine. With the balancing of the two, a man has confidence only when there are grounds for it. Then idleness overpowers one strong in concentration and weak in energy, since concentration favors idleness. Agitation overpowers one strong in energy and weak in concentration, since energy favors agitation. But concentration coupled with energy cannot lapse into idleness, and energy coupled with concentration cannot lapse into agitation. So these two should be balanced, for absorption comes with the balancing of the two. Again, concentration and faith should be balanced. One working on concentration needs strong faith, since it is with such faith and confidence that he reaches absorption. Then there is balancing of concentration and understanding. One working on concentration needs strong unification, since that is how he reaches absorption. And one working on insight needs strong understanding, since that is how he reaches penetration of characteristics. But with the balancing of the two, he reaches absorption as well. Strong mindfulness, however, is needed in all instances. For mindfulness protects the mind from lapsing into agitation through faith, energy, and understanding, which favor agitation, and from lapsing into idleness through concentration, which favors idleness. So it is as desirable in all instances as a seasoning of salt in all sauces, as a prime minister in all the king's business. Hence it is said, in the commentaries, and mindfulness has been called universal by the Blessed One. For what reason? Because the mind has mindfulness as its refuge, and mindfulness is manifested as protection, and there is no exertion and restraint of the mind without mindfulness. Skill in the sign is skill in producing the as yet unproduced sign of unification of mind through the Earth Kasina, and it is skill in developing the sign when produced, and skill in protecting the sign when obtained by development. The last is what is intended here. How does he exert the mind on an occasion when it should be exerted? When his mind is slack with overlaxness of energy, then, instead of developing the three Enlightenment factors beginning with tranquility, he should develop those beginning with investigation of states. For this is said by the Blessed One, Bhikkhus, suppose a man wanted to make a small fire burn up, and he put wet grass on it, put wet cow dung on it, put wet sticks on it, sprinkled it with water, and scattered dust on it. Would that man be able to make the small fire burn up? No, venerable sir. So too, because when the mind is slack, that is not the time to develop the tranquility enlightenment factor, the concentration enlightenment factor, or the equanimity enlightenment factor. Why is that? Because a slack mind cannot well be roused by those states. When the mind is slack, that is the time to develop the investigation of states enlightenment factor, the energy enlightenment factor, and the happiness enlightenment factor. Why is that? Because a slack mind can well be roused by those states. Because, suppose a man wanted to make a small fire burn up, and he put dry grass on it, put dry cow dung on it, put dry sticks on it, blew on it with his mouth and did not scatter dust on it. Would that man be able to make that small fire burn up? Yes, venerable sir. And here the development of the investigation of states enlightenment factor should be understood as the nutriment for each one respectively. For this is said, Bhikkhus, there are profitable and unprofitable states, reprehensible and blameless states, inferior and superior states, dark and bright states, the counterpart of each other. Wise attention much practiced therein is the nutriment for the arising of the unreason investigation of states enlightenment factor, or leads to the growth, fulfillment, development, and perfection of the arisen investigation of states enlightenment factor. Likewise, Bhikkhus, there is the element of initiative, the element of launching, and the element of persistence. Wise attention much practiced therein is the nutriment for the arising of the unrisen energy enlightenment factor, or leads to the growth, fulfillment, development, and perfection of the arisen energy enlightenment factors. Likewise, Bhikkhus, there are states productive of the happiness enlightenment factor. Wise attention, much practiced therein, is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen happiness enlightenment factor, or leads to the growth, fulfillment, development, and perfection of the arisen happiness enlightenment factor. Herein, wise attention given to the profitable is attention occurring in penetration of individual essences and of the three general characteristics. Wise attention given to the element of initiative is attention occurring in the arousing of the element of initiative, and so on. Herein, initial energy is called the element of initiative. The element of launching is stronger than that because it launches out from idleness. The element of persistence is still stronger than that because it goes on persisting in successive later stages. States productive of the happiness enlightenment factor is a name for happiness itself, and attention that arouses, that is wise attention. There are, besides, 7 things that lead to the arising of the investigation of state's enlightenment factor: asking questions, making the basis clean, balancing the faculties, avoidance of persons without understanding, cultivation of persons with understanding, reviewing the field for the exercise of profound knowledge, resoluteness upon that investigation of states. 11 things lead to the arising of the energy enlightenment factor: reviewing the fearfulness of the states of loss, such as the hell realms, seeing benefit in obtaining the mundane and supramundane distinctions dependent on energy, reviewing the course of the journey, to be traveled, thus. The path taken by the Buddhas, Pachaka Buddhas, and the great disciples has to be taken by me, and it cannot be taken by an idler, being a credit to the alms food by producing great fruit for the givers, reviewing the greatness of the Master, thus. My Master praises the energetic, and this unsurpassable dispensation that is so helpful to us is honored in the practice, not otherwise. Reviewing the greatness of the heritage thus. It is the great heritage called the good Dhamma that is to be acquired by me, and it cannot be acquired by an idler. Removing stiffness and torpor by attention to perception of light, change of postures, frequenting the open air, avoidance of idle persons, cultivation of energetic persons, reviewing the right endeavors, resoluteness upon that energy. 11 things lead to the arising of the happiness enlightenment factor: the recollections of the Buddha, of the Dhamma, of the Sangha, of virtue, of generosity, and of deities, the recollection of peace, avoidance of rough persons, cultivation of refined persons, reviewing encouraging discourses, resoluteness upon that happiness. So by arousing these things in these ways, he develops the investigation of state's enlightenment factor and the others. This is how he exerts the mind on an occasion when it should be exerted. How does he restrain the mind on an occasion when it should be restrained? When his mind is agitated through over-energeticness, then, instead of developing the 3 enlightenment factors beginning with investigation of states, he should develop those beginning with tranquility. For this is said by the Blessed One: Bhikkhus, suppose a man wanted to extinguish a great mass of fire, and he put dry grass on it, and did not scatter dust on it. Would that man be able to extinguish that great mass of fire? No, venerable sir. So too, bhikkhus, when the mind is agitated, that is not the time to develop the investigation of state's enlightenment factor, the energy enlightenment factor, or the happiness enlightenment factor. Why is that? Because an agitated mind cannot well be quieted by those states. When the mind is agitated, that is the time to develop the tranquility enlightenment factor, the concentration enlightenment factor, and the equanimity enlightenment factor. Why is that? Because an agitated mind can well be quieted by those states. Bhikkhus, suppose a man wanted to extinguish a great mass of fire, and he put wet grass on it, and scattered dust on it. Would that man be able to extinguish that great mass of fire? Yes, venerable sir. And here the development of the tranquility enlightenment factor, etc., should be understood as the nutriment for each one respectively, for this is said: Bhikkhus, there is bodily tranquility and mental tranquility. Wise attention, much practiced therein, is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen tranquility enlightenment factor, or leads to the growth, fulfillment, development, and perfection of the arisen tranquility enlightenment factor. Likewise, bhikkhus, there is the sign of serenity, the sign of non-diversion. Wise attention, much practiced, therein is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen concentration enlightenment factor, or it leads to the growth, fulfillment, development, and perfection of the arisen concentration enlightenment factor. Likewise, bhikkhus, there are states productive of the equanimity enlightenment factor. Wise attention, much practiced, therein is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen equanimity enlightenment factor, or it leads to the growth, fulfillment, development, and perfection of the arisen equanimity enlightenment factor. Herein wise attention given to the three instances is attention occurring in arousing tranquility by observing the way in which they arose in him earlier. The sign of serenity is a term for serenity itself, and non-diversion is a term for that too in the sense of non-distraction. There are, besides, 7 things that lead to the arising of the tranquility enlightenment factor: using superior food, living in a good climate, maintaining a pleasant posture, keeping to the middle, avoidance of violent persons, cultivation of persons tranquil in body, resoluteness upon that tranquility. 11 things lead to the arising of the concentration enlightenment factor: making the basis clean, skill in the sign, balancing the faculties, restraining the mind on occasion, exerting the mind on occasion, encouraging the listless mind by means of faith and a sense of urgency, looking on with equanimity at what is occurring rightly, avoidance of unconcentrated persons, cultivation of concentrated persons, reviewing of the jhanas and liberations, resoluteness upon that concentration. 5 things lead to the arising of the equanimity enlightenment factor: maintenance of neutrality towards living beings, maintenance of neutrality towards formations, inanimate things, avoidance of persons who show favoritism towards beings and formations, cultivation of persons who maintain neutrality towards beings and formations, resoluteness upon that, equanimity. So by arousing these things in these ways, he develops the tranquility enlightenment factor, as well as the others. This is how he restrains the mind on an occasion when it should be restrained. How does he encourage the mind on an occasion when it should be encouraged? When his mind is listless owing to sluggishness in the exercise of understanding or to failure to attain the bliss of peace, then he should stimulate it by reviewing the 8 grounds for a sense of urgency. These are the 4, namely, birth, aging, sickness, and death, with the suffering of the states of loss as the 5th, and also the suffering in the past rooted in the round of rebirths, the suffering in the future rooted in the round of rebirths, and the suffering in the present rooted in the search for nutriment. And he creates confidence by recollecting the special qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. This is how he encourages the mind on an occasion when it should be encouraged. How does he look on at the mind with equanimity on an occasion when it should be looked on at with equanimity? When he is practicing in this way and his mind follows the road of serenity, occurs evenly on the object, and is unital, unagitated, and not listless, then he is not interested to exert or restrain or encourage it. He is like a charioteer when the horses are progressing evenly. This is how he looks on at the mind with equanimity on an occasion when it should be looked on at with equanimity. Avoidance of unconcentrated persons is keeping far away from persons who have never trodden the way of renunciation, who are busy with many affairs, and whose hearts are distracted. Cultivation of concentrated persons is approaching periodically persons who have trodden the way of renunciation and obtained concentration. Resoluteness upon that is the state of being resolute upon concentration. The meaning is giving concentration importance, tending, leaning, and inclining to concentration. This is how the 10-fold skill in concentration should be undertaken. Any man who acquires this sign, this 10-fold skill will need to heed in order for absorption to gain thus achieving his bolder goal. But if in spite of his efforts, no result comes that might requite his work, still a wise wight persists, never this task relinquishing, since a tyro, if he gives up thinking not to continue in the task, never gains distinction here no matter how small at all. A man wise in temperament notices how his mind inclines, energy and serenity. Always he couples each to each, now, his mind, seeing that it holds back, he prods, now the restraining rein, tightening, seeing it pull too hard, guiding with even pace the race. Well-controlled bees get the pollen, well-balanced efforts meet to treat leaves, thread and ships and oil tubes too, gain thus, not otherwise, the prize. Let him set aside this lax, also this agitated state, steering here his mind at the sign, as the bee and the rest suggests. Here is the explanation of the meaning. When a too clever bee learns that a flower on a tree is blooming, it sets out hurriedly, overshoots the mark, turns back, and arrives when the pollen is finished. And another, not clever enough bee, who sets out with too slow a speed, arrives when the pollen is finished too. But a clever bee sets out with balanced speed, arrives with ease at the cluster of flowers, takes as much pollen as it pleases and enjoys the honey-dew. Again, when a surgeon's pupils are being trained in the use of the scalpel on a lotus leaf in a dish of water, one who is too clever applies the scalpel hurriedly and either cuts the lotus leaf in two or pushes it under the water, and another who is not clever enough does not even dare to touch it with the scalpel for fear of cutting it in two or pushing it under. But one who is clever shows the scalpel stroke on it by means of a balanced effort, and being good at his craft, he is rewarded on such occasions. Again, when the king announces, "Anyone who can draw out a spider's thread 4 fathoms long shall receive 4,000. One man who is too clever breaks the spider's thread here and there by pulling it hurriedly, and another who is not clever enough does not dare to touch it with his hand for fear of breaking it, but a clever man pulls it out starting from the end with a balanced effort, wins it on a stick, and so wins the prize. Again, a too clever skipper hoists full sails in a high wind and sends his ship adrift, and another, not clever enough skipper, lowers his sails in a light wind and remains where he is. But a clever skipper hoists full sails in a light wind, takes in half his sails in a high wind, and so arrives safely at his desired destination. Again, when a teacher says, "Anyone who fills the oil tube without spilling any oil will win a prize," one who is too clever fills it hurriedly out of greed for the prize, and he spills the oil, and another who is not clever enough does not dare to pour the oil at all for fear of spilling it. But one who is clever fills it with a balanced effort and wins the prize. Just as in these 5 similes, so too when the sign arises, one bhikkhu forces his energy, thinking, "I shall soon reach absorption." Then his mind lapses into agitation because of his mind's overexerted energy, and he is prevented from reaching absorption. Another who sees the defect in overexertion slacks off his energy, thinking, "What is absorption to me now?" Then his mind lapses into idleness because of his mind's too lax energy, and he too is prevented from reaching absorption. Yet another who frees his mind from idleness, even when it is only slightly idle, and from agitation, when only slightly agitated, confronting the sign with balanced effort, reaches absorption. One should be like the last named. It was with reference to this meaning that it was said above, "Well-controlled bees get the pollen. Well-balanced efforts meet to treat leaves, thread and ships, and oil tubes too. Gain thus, not otherwise, the prize." Let him set aside then this lax, also this agitated state, steering here his mind at the sign as the bee and the rest suggest. So, while he is guiding his mind in this way, confronting the sign, then knowing, now absorption will succeed, there arises in him mind door adverting with that same Earth Kasina as its object, interrupting the occurrence of consciousness as life continuum, and evoked by the constant repeating of earth, earth. After that, either 4 or 5 impulsions impel on that same object. the last one of which is an impulsion of the fine material sphere. The rest are of the sense sphere, but they have stronger applied thought, sustained thought, happiness, bliss, and unification of mind than the normal ones. They are called preliminary work, consciousnesses, because they are the preliminary work for absorption. And they are also called access, consciousnesses, because of their nearness to absorption, because they happen in its neighborhood, just as the words village access and city access are used for a place near to a village. And they are also called conformity, consciousnesses, because they conform to those that precede the preliminary work, consciousnesses, and to the absorption that follows. And the last of these is also called change of lineage, because it transcends the limited sense sphere lineage and brings into being the exalted, fine material sphere lineage. But omitting repetitions, then either the first is the preliminary work, the second, access, the third, conformity, and the fourth, change of lineage, or else the first is access, the second, conformity, and the third, change of lineage. Then either the fourth in the latter case, or the fifth in the former case, is the absorption consciousness, for it is only either the fourth or the fifth that fixes in absorption. And that is according as there is swift or sluggish direct knowledge. Beyond that, impulsion lapses and the life continuum takes over. But the Abhidhamma scholar, the elder Gadatta, quoted this text: preceding profitable states are a condition, as repetition condition, for succeeding profitable states. Adding, it is owing to the repetition condition that each succeeding state is strong, so there is absorption also in the sixth and seventh. That is rejected by the commentaries with the remark that it is merely that elder's opinion, adding that it is only either in the fourth or the fifth that there is absorption. Beyond that, impulsion lapses. It is said to do so because of nearness of the life continuum. And that has been stated in this way after consideration, so it cannot be rejected. For just as a man who is running towards a precipice and wants to stop cannot do so when he has his foot on the edge but falls over it, so there can be no fixing and absorption in the sixth or the seventh because of the nearness to the life continuum. That is why it should be understood that there is absorption only in the fourth or the fifth. But that absorption is only of a single conscious moment. For there are 7 instances in which the normal extent of the cognitive series does not apply. They are in the cases of the first absorption, the mundane kinds of direct knowledge, the 4 paths, fruition next after the path. Life continuum jhana in the fine material and immaterial kinds of becoming, the base consisting of neither perception nor non-perception, as condition for cessation of perception and feeling, and the fruition attainment in one emerging from cessation. Here the fruition next after the path does not exceed 3 consciousnesses in number. The consciousnesses of the base consisting of neither perception nor non-perception as condition for cessation do not exceed 2 in number. There is no measure of the number of consciousnesses in the life continuum in the fine material and immaterial kinds of becoming. In the remaining instances, the number of consciousnesses is 1 only, so absorption is of a single consciousness moment. After that, it lapses into the life continuum. Then the life continuum is interrupted by adverting for the purpose of reviewing the jhana, next to which comes the reviewing of the jhana. At this point, quite secluded from sense desires, secluded from unprofitable things, he enters upon and dwells in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought with happiness and bliss born of seclusion. And so he has attained the first jhana, which abandons 5 factors, possesses 5 factors, is good in 3 ways, possesses 10 characteristics, and is of the Earth Kasina. Herein, quite secluded from sense desires means having secluded himself from, having become without, having gone away from, sense desires. Now, this word quite should be understood to have the meaning of absoluteness. Precisely because it has the meaning of absoluteness, it shows how, on the actual occasion of entering upon and dwelling in the first jhana, sense desires as well as being non-existent, then are the first jhana's contrary opposite, and it also shows that the arrival takes place only through the letting go of sense desires. How? When absoluteness is introduced thus, quite secluded from sense desires, what is expressed is this: sense desires are certainly incompatible with this jhana. When they exist, it does not occur, just as when there is darkness, there is no lamplight. And it is only by letting go of them that it is reached, just as the further bank is reached only by letting go of the near bank. That is why absoluteness is introduced. Here it might be asked, but why is this word quite mentioned only in the first phrase and not in the second? How is this, might he enter upon and dwell in the first jhana, even when not secluded from unprofitable things? It should not be regarded in that way. It is mentioned in the first phrase as the escape from them, for this jhana is the escape from sense desires, since it surmounts the sense desire element, and since it is incompatible with greed for sense desires, according as it is said. The escape from sense desires is this, that is to say, renunciation. But in the second phrase, the word eva should be adduced and taken as said, as in the passage, bhikkhus. Only here is there an ascetic, here a second ascetic. For it is impossible to enter upon and dwell in jhana unsecluded also from unprofitable things. In other words, the hindrances other than that sense desire. So this word must be read in both phrases thus: quite secluded from sense desires, quite secluded from unprofitable things. And although the word secluded, as a general term, includes all kinds of seclusion, that is to say, seclusion by substitution of opposites, and bodily seclusion, still only the three, namely bodily seclusion, mental seclusion, and seclusion by suppression, suspension, should be regarded here. But this term, sense desires, should be regarded as including all kinds, that is to say, sense desires as object as given in the Nidesa in the passage beginning. What are sense desires as object? They are agreeable, visible objects. And the sense desires as defilement given thereto and in the Vibhaugi thus. Zeal as sense-desire, greed as sense-desire, zeal and greed as sense-desire, thinking as sense-desire, greed as sense-desire, thinking and greed as sense-desire. That being so, the words, quite secluded from sense desires, properly mean quite secluded from sense desires as object, and express bodily seclusion, while the words, secluded from unprofitable things, properly mean secluded from sense desires as defilement or from all unprofitable things, and express mental seclusion. And in this case, giving up of pleasure in sense desires is indicated by the first, since it only expresses seclusion from sense desires as object, while acquisition of pleasure in renunciation is indicated by the second, since it expresses seclusion from sense desire as defilement, and with sense desires as object and sense desires as defilament expressed in this way, it should also be recognized that the abandoning of the objective basis for defilement is indicated by the first of these two phrases and the abandoning of the subjective defilement by the second. Also, that the giving up of the cause of cupidity is indicated by the first and the giving up of the cause of stupidity by the second. Also, that the purification of one's occupation is indicated by the first and the educating of one's inclination by the second. This, firstly, is the method here when the words from sense desires are treated as referring to sense desires as object. But if they are treated as referring to sense desires as defilement, then it is simply just zeal for sense desires, kamachanda, in the various forms of zeal, chanda, greed, raga, etc., that is intended as sense desires. And although that lust is also included by unprofitable, it is nevertheless stated separately in the Vibhagga in the way beginning, herein, what are sense desires, zeal as sense desire, because of its incompatibility with jhana. Or, alternatively, it is mentioned in the first phrase because it is sense desire as defilement, and in the second phrase because it is included in the unprofitable. And because this lust has various forms, therefore, from sense desires is said instead of from sense desire. And although there may be unprofitableness in other states as well, nevertheless, only the hindrances are mentioned subsequently in the Visuddhimagga thus. Herein, what states are unprofitable? Lust. In order to show their opposition to and incompatibility with the jhana factors. For the hindrances are the contrary opposites of the jhana factors. What is meant is that the jhana factors are incompatible with them, eliminate them, abolish them. And it is said accordingly in the Purification. Concentration is incompatible with lust, happiness with ill will, applied thought with stiffness and torpor, bliss with agitation and worry, and sustained thought with uncertainty. Not in Purification. So in this case, it should be understood that seclusion by suppression, suspension of lust, is indicated by the phrase quite secluded from sense desires, and seclusion by suppression, suspension of all 5 hindrances by the phrase is secluded from unprofitable things, but omitting repetitions, that of lust is indicated by the first and that of the remaining hindrances by the second. Similarly with the 3 unprofitable roots, that of greed, which has the 5 cords of sense desires its province, is indicated by the first, and that of hate and delusion, which have as their respective provinces the various grounds for annoyance, by the second. Or with the states consisting of the floods, that of the flood of sense desires, of the bond of sense desires, of the canker of sense desire clinging, of the bodily tie of covetousness, and of the fetter of greed for sense desires, is indicated by the first, and that of the remaining floods, bonds, cankers, clinging ties, and fetters, is indicated by the second. Again, that of craving and of what is associated with craving is indicated by the first, and that of ignorance and of what is associated with ignorance is indicated by the second. Furthermore, that of the 8 thought arisings associated with greed is indicated by the first, and that of the remaining kinds of unprofitable thought arisings is indicated by the second. This, in the first place, is the explanation of the meaning of the words quite secluded from sense desires, secluded from unprofitable things. So far the factors abandoned by the jhana have been shown. And now, in order to show the factors associated with it, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought is said. Herein, applied thinking, vitakkhana, is applied thought, vitakka. Hitting upon is what is meant. It has the characteristic of directing the mind onto an object, mounting the mind on its object. Its function is to strike at and thresh. For the meditator is said, in virtue of it, to have the object struck at by applied thought, threshed by applied thought. It is manifested as the leading of the mind onto an object. Sustained thinking, vikarana, is sustained thought, vikara. Continued sustainment is what is meant. It has the characteristic of continued pressure on, occupation with, the object. Its function is to keep connascent, mental states, occupied with that. It is manifested as keeping consciousness anchored on that object. And, though sometimes not separate, applied thought is the first impact of the mind in the sense that it is both gross and inceptive, like the striking of a bell. Sustained thought is the act of keeping the mind anchored, in the sense that it is subtle with the individual essence of continued pressure, like the ringing of the bell. Applied thought intervenes, being the interference of consciousness at the time of first arousing thought, like a bird's spreading out its wings when about to soar into the air, and like a bee's diving towards a lotus when it is minded to follow up the scent of it. The behavior of sustained thought is quiet, being the near non-interference of consciousness, like the bird's planing with outspread wings after soaring into the air, and like the bee's buzzing above the lotus after it has dived towards it. In the commentary to the Book of Twos, this is said, Applied thought occurs as a state of directing the mind onto an object, like the movement of a large bird taking off into the air by engaging the air with both wings and forcing them downwards, for it causes absorption by being unified. Sustained thought occurs with the individual essence of continued pressure, like the bird's movement when it is using its wings for the purpose of keeping hold on the air, for it keeps pressing the object. That fits in with the latter's occurrence as anchoring. This difference of theirs becomes evident in the first and second jhanas in the fivefold reckoning. Furthermore, applied thought is like the hand that grips firmly and sustained. Thought is like the hand that rubs, when one grips a tarnished metal dish firmly with one hand and rubs it with powder and oil and a woolen pad with the other hand. Likewise, when a potter has spun his wheel with a stroke on the stick and is making a dish, his supporting hand is like applied thought, and his hand that moves back and forth is like sustained thought. Likewise, when one is drawing a circle, the pin that stays fixed down in the center is like applied thought, which directs onto the object, and the pin that revolves round it is like sustained thought, which continuously presses. So this jhana occurs together with this applied thought and this sustained thought, and it is called accompanied by applied and sustained thought, as a tree is called accompanied by flowers and fruits. But in the Visuddhimagga, the teaching is given in terms of a person in the way beginning. He is possessed, fully possessed, of this applied thought and this sustained thought. The meaning should be regarded in the same way there too. Born of seclusion, here, secludedness is seclusion. The meaning is disappearance of hindrances, or alternatively, it is secluded, thus it is seclusion. The meaning is, the collection of states associated with the jhana is secluded from hindrances. Born of seclusion is born of or in that kind of seclusion. Happiness and bliss. It refreshes, thus it is happiness, pt. It has the characteristic of endearing. Its function is to refresh the body and the mind, or its function is to pervade, thrill with rapture. It is manifested as elation. But it is of 5 kinds, as minor happiness, momentary happiness, showering happiness, uplifting happiness, and pervading, rapturous happiness. Herein, minor happiness is only able to raise the hairs on the body. Momentary happiness is like flashes of lightning at different moments. Showering happiness breaks over the body again and again, like waves on the seashore. Uplifting happiness can be powerful enough to levitate the body and make it spring up into the air. For this was what happened to the elder Maha Tissa, resident at Punavalika. He went to the shrine terrace on the evening of the full moon day. Seeing the moonlight, he faced in the direction of the great shrine at Anuradhapura, thinking, "At this very hour the 4 assemblies are worshipping at the great shrine." By means of objects formerly seen, he aroused uplifting happiness with the enlightened one as object, and he rose into the air like a painted ball bounced off a plastered floor and alighted on the terrace of the great shrine. And this was what happened to the daughter of a clan in the village of Vatakalika near the Girikanaka monastery, when she sprang up into the air owing to strong uplifting happiness with the enlightened one as object. As her parents were about to go to the monastery in the evening, it seems, in order to hear the Dhamma, they told her, "My dear, you are expecting a child. You cannot go out at an unsuitable time. We shall hear the Dhamma and gain merit for you." So they went out, and though she wanted to go too, she could not well object to what they said. She stepped out of the house onto a balcony and stood looking at the Akasasetya shrine at Girikanaka lit by the moon. She saw the offering of lamps at the shrine and the 4 communities as they circumambulated it to the right after making their offerings of flowers and perfumes, and she heard the sound of the massed recital by the community of bhikkhus. Then she thought, how lucky they are to be able to go to the monastery and wander round such a shrine terrace and listen to such sweet preaching of Dhamma. Seeing the shrine as a mound of pearls and arousing uplifting happiness, she sprang up into the air, and before her parents arrived, she came down from the air into the shrine terrace, where she paid homage and stood listening to the Dhamma. When her parents arrived, they asked her, "What road did you come by?" She said, "I came through the air, not by the road." And when they told her, "My dear, those whose cankers are destroyed come through the air. But how did you come?" She replied, "As I was standing looking at the shrine in the moonlight, a strong sense of happiness arose in me, with the Enlightened One as its object. Then I knew no more whether I was standing or sitting, but only that I was springing up into the air with the sign that I had grasped, and I came to rest on this shrine terrace. So uplifting happiness can be powerful enough to levitate the body, make it spring up into the air. But when pervading, rapturous happiness arises, the whole body is completely pervaded, like a filled bladder, like a rock cavern invaded by a huge inundation. Now, this fivefold happiness, when conceived and matured, perfects the twofold tranquility, that is, bodily and mental tranquility. When tranquility is conceived and matured, it perfects the twofold bliss, that is, bodily and mental bliss. When bliss is conceived and matured, it perfects the threefold concentration, that is, momentary concentration, access concentration, and absorption concentration. Of these, what is intended in this context by happiness is pervading happiness, which is the root of absorption, and comes by growth into association with absorption. But as to the other word, pleasing is bliss. Or alternatively, it thoroughly devours, consumes, bodily and mental affliction. Thus, it is bliss. It has gratifying as its characteristic. Its function is to intensify associated states. It is manifested as aid, and wherever the two are associated, happiness is the contentedness at getting a desirable object, and bliss is the actual experiencing of it when got. Where there is happiness, there is bliss, pleasure. But where there is bliss, there is not necessarily happiness. Happiness is included in the formations aggregate. Bliss is included in the feeling aggregate. If a man, exhausted in a desert, saw or heard about a pond on the edge of a wood, he would have happiness. If he went into the wood shade and used the water, he would have bliss. And it should be understood that this is said because they are obvious on such occasions. Accordingly, this happiness and this bliss are of this jhana, or in this jhana. So in this way, this jhana is qualified by the words with happiness and bliss, and also born of seclusion. Or alternatively, the words happiness and bliss can be taken as the happiness and the bliss independently, like the Dhamma and the discipline. And so then it can be taken as seclusion-born happiness and bliss of this jhana, or in this jhana. So in this way, it is the happiness and bliss, rather than the jhana, that are born of seclusion. For just as the words born of seclusion can as that be taken as qualifying the word jhana, so too they can be taken here as qualifying the expression happiness and bliss, and then that total expression is predicated of this jhana. So it is also correct to call happiness and bliss born of seclusion a single expression. In the Vibhavoga, it is stated in the way beginning, this bliss accompanied by this happiness. The meaning should be regarded in the same way there too. Enters upon arrives at, reaches is what is meant, or else, taking it as makes enter, then producing is what is meant. In the Vibhavoga, this is said, enters upon, the gaining, the regaining, the reaching, the arrival at, the touching, the realizing of, the entering upon, the first jhana, the meaning of which should be regarded in the same way, and dwells in, by becoming possessed of jhana of the kind described above through dwelling in a posture favorable to that jhana, he produces a posture, a procedure, a keeping, an enduring, a lasting, a behavior, a dwelling of the person. For this is said in the Vibhavoga, dwells in, poses, proceeds, keeps, endures, lasts, behaves, dwells. Hence, dwells is said. Now, it was also said above, which abandons 5 factors, possesses 5 factors. Herein, the abandoning of the 5 factors should be understood as the abandoning of these 5 hindrances, namely, lust, ill will, stiffness and torpor, agitation and worry, and uncertainty. For no jhana arises until these have been abandoned, and so they are called the factors of abandoning. For although other unprofitable things too are abandoned at the moment of jhana, still only these are specifically obstructive to jhana. The mind affected through lust by greed for varied objective fields does not become concentrated on an object consisting in unity or being overwhelmed by lust. It does not enter on the way to abandoning the sense desire element. When pestered by ill will towards an object, it does not occur uninterruptedly. When overcome by stiffness and torpor, it is unwieldy. When seized by agitation and worry, it is unquiet and buzzes about. When stricken by uncertainty, it fails to mount the way to accomplish the attainment of jhana. So it is these only that are called factors of abandoning, because they are specifically obstructive to jhana. But applied thought directs the mind onto the object. Sustained thought keeps it anchored there. Happiness produced by the success of the effort refreshes the mind whose effort has succeeded through not being distracted by those hindrances, and bliss intensifies it for the same reason. Then unification, aided by this directing onto, this anchoring, this refreshing, and this intensifying, evenly and rightly centers the mind with its remaining associated states on the object consisting in unity. Consequently, possession of 5 factors should be understood as the arising of these 5, namely applied thought, sustained thought, happiness, bliss, and unification of mind. For it is when these are arisen that jhana is said to be arisen, which is why they are called the 5 factors of possession. Therefore, it should not be assumed that the jhana is something other which possesses them. But just as the army with the 4 factors, and music with the 5 factors, and the path with the 8 factors, eightfold path, are stated simply in terms of their factors, so this too should be understood as stated simply in terms of its factors, when it is said to have 5 factors, or possess 5 factors. And while these 5 factors are present also at the moment of access, and are stronger in access than in normal consciousness, they are still stronger here than in access, and acquire the characteristic of the fine material sphere. For applied thought arises here directing the mind onto the object in an extremely lucid manner, and sustained thought does so pressing the object very hard, and the happiness and bliss pervade the entire body. Hence it is said, "And there is nothing of his whole body not permeated by the happiness and bliss born of seclusion." And unification, too, arises in the complete contact with the object that the surface of a box's lid has, with the surface of its base. This is how they differ from the others. Although unification of mind is not actually listed among these factors in the summary version, beginning, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, nevertheless it is mentioned in the Vibhaghosa as follows. Jhana, it is applied thought, sustained thought, happiness, bliss, unification, and so it is a factor too, for the intention with which the Blessed One gave the summary is the same as that with which he gave the exposition that follows it. Is good in 3 ways, possesses 10 characteristics. The goodness in 3 ways is in the beginning, middle, and end. The possession of the 10 characteristics should be understood as the characteristics of the beginning, middle, and end too. Here is the text. Of the first jhana, purification of the way is the beginning, intensification of equanimity is the middle, and satisfaction is the end. Of the first jhana, purification of the way is the beginning. How many characteristics has the beginning? The beginning has 3 characteristics. The mind is purified of obstructions to that, jhana. Because it is purified, the mind makes way for the central state of equilibrium, which is the sign of serenity. Because it has made way, the mind enters into that state. And it is since the mind becomes purified of obstructions, and through being purified, makes way for the central state of equilibrium, which is the sign of serenity, and, having made way, enters into that state, that the purification of the way is the beginning of the first jhana. These are the three characteristics of the beginning. Hence it is said, the first jhana is good in the beginning, which possesses three characteristics. Of the first jhana, intensification of equanimity is the middle. How many characteristics has the middle? The middle has three characteristics. He now looks on with equanimity at the mind that is purified. He looks on with equanimity at it as having made way for serenity. He looks on with equanimity at the appearance of unity. And in that he now looks on with equanimity at the mind that is purified, and looks on with equanimity at it as having made way for serenity, and looks on with equanimity at the appearance of unity. That intensification of equanimity is the middle of the first jhana. These are the three characteristics of the middle. Hence it is said, the first jhana is good in the middle, which possesses three characteristics. Of the first jhana, satisfaction is the end. How many characteristics has the end? The end has four characteristics. The satisfaction in the sense that there was non-excess of any of the states arisen therein, and the satisfaction in the sense that the faculties had a single function, and the satisfaction in the sense that the appropriate energy was effective, and the satisfaction in the sense of repetition, are the satisfaction in the end of the first jhana. These are the four characteristics of the end. Hence it is said, the first jhana is good in the end, which possesses four characteristics. Herein, purification of the way is accessed together with its concomitants. Intensification of equanimity is absorption. Satisfaction is reviewing. So some comment, but it is said in the text, the mind arrived at unity, enters into purification of the way, is intensified in equanimity, and is satisfied by knowledge. And therefore it is from the standpoint within actual absorption that purification of the way firstly should be understood as the approach, with intensification of equanimity as the function of equanimity consisting in specific neutrality, and satisfaction as the manifestation of clarifying knowledge's function in accomplishing non-excess of states. How? Firstly, in a cycle of consciousness, in which absorption arises, the mind becomes purified from the group of defilements called hindrances that are an obstruction to jhana. Being devoid of obstruction because it has been purified, it makes way for the central state of equilibrium, which is the sign of serenity. Now, it is the absorption concentration itself occurring evenly that is called the sign of serenity. But the consciousness immediately before that reaches that state by way of change in a single continuity, and so it is said that it makes way for the central state of equilibrium, which is the sign of serenity. And it is said that it enters into that state by approaching it through having made way for it. That is why, in the first place, purification of the way, while referring to aspects existing in the preceding consciousness, should nevertheless be understood as the approach at the moment of the first jhana's actual arising. Secondly, when he has more interest in purifying, since there is no need to re-purify what has already been purified thus, it is said that he looks on with equanimity at the mind that is purified. And when he has no more interest in concentrating again, what has already made way for serenity by arriving at the state of serenity, it is said that he looks on with equanimity at it as having made way for serenity. And when he has no more interest in again causing appearance of unity in what has already appeared as unity through abandonment of its association with defilement in making way for serenity, it is said that he looks on with equanimity at the appearance of unity. That is why intensification of equanimity should be understood as the function of equanimity that consists in specific neutrality. And lastly, when equanimity was thus intensified, the states called concentration and understanding produced there occurred coupled together without either one exceeding the other. And also the five faculties beginning with faith occurred with the single function, taste, of deliverance, owing to deliverance from the various defilements. and also the energy appropriate to that which was favorable to their state of non-excess and single function was effective, and also its repetition occurs at that moment. Now, all these aspects are only produced because it is after seeing with knowledge the various dangers in defilement and advantages in cleansing that satisfiedness, purifiedness, and clarifiedness ensue accordingly. That is the reason why it was said that satisfaction should be understood as the manifestation of clarifying knowledge's function in accomplishing non-excess of states. Herein, satisfaction as a function of knowledge is called the end, since the knowledge is evident as due to onlooking equanimity, according as it is said. He looks on with complete equanimity at the mind thus exerted. Then the understanding faculty is outstanding, as understanding due to equanimity. Owing to equanimity, the mind is liberated from the many sorts of defilements. Then the understanding faculty is outstanding as understanding due to liberation. Because of being liberated, these states come to have a single function. Then, the understanding faculty is outstanding as understanding due to development in the sense of the single function. Now, as to the words, and so he has attained the first jhana of the Earth Kasina. Here it is first, because it starts a numerical series. Also, it is first because it arises first. It is called jhana because of lighting the object and because of burning up opposition. The disk of earth is called Earth Kasina in the sense of entirety, and the sign acquired with that as its support, and also the jhana acquired in the Earth Kasina sign are so called too. So that jhana should be understood as of the Earth Kasina in this sense, with reference to which it was said above, and so he has attained to the first jhana of the Earth Kasina. When it has been attained in this way, the mode of its attainment must be discerned by the meditator as if he were a hair splitter or a cook. For when a very skillful archer who is working to split a hair actually splits the hair on one occasion, he discerns the modes of the position of his feet, the bow, the bowstring, and the arrow, thus. I split the hair as I stood thus, with the bow thus, the bowstring thus, the arrow thus. From then on, he recaptures those same modes and repeats the splitting of the hair without fail. So too, the meditator must discern such modes as that of suitable food, thus, I attained this after eating this food, attending on such a person, in such a lodging, in this posture at this time. In this way, when that absorption is lost, he will be able to recapture those modes and renew the absorption, or while familiarizing himself with it, he will be able to repeat that absorption again and again. And just as when a skilled cook is serving his employer, he notices whatever he chooses to eat and from then on brings only that sort, and so obtains reward, so too this meditator discerns such modes as that of the food at the time of the attaining, and he recaptures them and reobtains absorption each time it is lost. So he must discern the modes as a hair splitter or a cook does. And this has been said by the Blessed One. Bhikkhus, suppose a wise, clever, skillful cook set various kinds of sauces before a king or a king's minister, such as sour, bitter, sharp, sweet, peppery and unpepper, salty and unsalty sauces. Then the wise, clever, skillful cook learned his master's sign thus, Today this sauce pleased my master, or he held out his hand for this one, or he took a lot of this one, or he praised this one, or today the sour kind pleased my master, or he held out his hand for the sour kind, or he took a lot of the sour kind, or he praised the sour kind, or he praised the unsalty kind. Then the wise, clever, skillful cook is rewarded with clothing and wages and presents. Why is that? Because that wise, clever, skillful cook learned his master's sign in this way. So too bhikkhus, here a wise, clever, skillful bhikkhu dwells contemplating the body as a body. He dwells contemplating feelings as feelings, consciousness as consciousness, mental objects as mental objects, ardent, fully aware and mindful, having put away covetousness and grief for the world. As he dwells contemplating mental objects as mental objects, his mind becomes concentrated, his defilements are abandoned. He learns the sign of that. Then that wise, clever, skillful bhikkhu is rewarded with a happy abiding here and now. He is rewarded with mindfulness and full awareness. Why is that? Because that wise, clever, skillful bhikkhu learned his consciousness's sign. And when he recaptures those modes by apprehending the sign, he just succeeds in reaching absorption, but not in making it last. It lasts when it is absolutely purified from states that obstruct concentration. When a bhikkhu enters upon a jhana without first completely suppressing lust by reviewing the dangers in sense desires, and without first completely tranquilizing bodily irritability by tranquilizing the body, and without first completely removing stiffness and torpor by bringing to mind the elements of initiative, and without first completely abolishing agitation and worry by bringing to mind the sign of serenity, and without first completely purifying his mind of other states that obstruct concentration. Then that bhikkhu soon comes out of that jhana again, like a bee that has gone into an unpurified hive, like a king who has gone into an unclean park. But when he enters upon a jhana after first completely purifying his mind of states that obstruct concentration, then he remains in the attainment even for a whole day, like a bee that has gone into a completely purified hive, like a king who has gone into a perfectly clean park. Hence the ancients said, "So let him dispel any sensual lust and resentment, agitation as well, and then torpor and doubt as the fifth. There let him find joy with a heart that is glad in seclusion, like a king in a garden where all and each corner is clean." So if he wants to remain long in the jhana, he must enter upon it after first purifying his mind from obstructive states. In order to perfect the development of consciousness, he should besides extend the counterpart sign according as acquired. Now there are two planes for extension, namely access and absorption, for it is possible to extend it on reaching access and on reaching absorption. But the extending should be done consistently in one or the other, which is why it was said, he should besides extend the counterpart sign according as acquired. The way to extend it is this. The meditator should not extend the sign as a clay bowl or a cake or boiled rice or a creeper or a piece of cloth is extended. He should first delimit with his mind successive sizes for the sign, according as acquired, that is to say, 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3 fingers, 4 fingers, and then extend it by the amount delimited, just as a plowman delimits with the plow the area to be plowed, and then plows within the area delimited, or just as bhikkhus fixing a boundary, first observe the marks and then fix it. He should not in fact extend it without having delimited. After that has been done, he can further extend it, doing so by delimiting successive boundaries of, say, a span, a ratana, the veranda, the surrounding space, the monastery, and the boundaries of the village, the town, the district, the kingdom, and the ocean, making the extreme limit the world sphere or even beyond. Just as young swans first starting to use their wings soar a little distance at a time, and by gradually increasing it, eventually reach the presence of the moon and sun, so too when a bhikkhu extends the sign by successive delimitations in the way described, he can extend it up to the limit of the world sphere or even beyond. Then that sign to him like an ox hide stretched out with 100 pegs over the earth's ridges and hollows, river ravines, tracts of scrub and thorns, and rocky inequalities in any area to which it has been extended. When a beginner has reached the first jhana in this sign, he should enter upon it often without reviewing it much, for the first jhana factors occur crudely and weakly in one who reviews it much. Then because of that, they do not become conditions for higher endeavor. While he is endeavoring for the unfamiliar, higher jhana, he falls away from the first jhana and fails to reach the second. Hence the Blessed One said, "Bhikkhus, suppose there were a foolish, stupid mountain cow, with no knowledge of fields and no skill in walking on craggy mountains, who thought, 'What if I walked in a direction I never walked in before, ate grass I never ate before, drank water I never drank before?' and without placing her forefoot properly, she lifted up her hind foot. Then she would not walk in the direction she never walked in before, or eat the grass she never ate before, or drink the water she never drank before. And also she would not get back safely to the place where she had thought, "What if I walked in a direction I never walked in before, drank water I never drank before?" Why is that? Because that mountain cow was foolish and stupid, with no knowledge of fields and no skill in walking on craggy mountains. So too, bhikkhus, here is a certain foolish, stupid bhikkhu, with no knowledge of fields and no skill, quite secluded from sense desires, secluded from unprofitable things, in entering upon and dwelling in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied thought and sustained thought with happiness and bliss born of seclusion. He does not repeat, develop, or cultivate that sign or properly establish it. He thinks, "What if with the subsiding of applied and sustained thought I entered upon and dwelt in the second jhana, which is with happiness and bliss born of concentration?" He is unable with the subsiding of applied and sustained thought to enter upon and dwell in the second jhana, which is with happiness and bliss born of concentration. Then he thinks, "What if, quite secluded from sense desires, secluded from unprofitable things, I entered upon and dwelt in the first jhana, which is with happiness and bliss born of seclusion?" He is unable, quite secluded from sense desires, secluded from unprofitable things, to enter upon and dwell in the first jhana, which is with happiness and bliss born of seclusion. This bhikkhu is called one who has slipped between the two, who has fallen between the two, just like the foolish, stupid mountain cow with no knowledge of fields, and no skill in walking on craggy mountains. Therefore, he should acquire mastery in the 5 ways first of all, with respect to the first jhana. Herein, these are the 5 kinds of mastery: mastery in adverting, mastery in attaining, mastery in resolving, steadying the duration, mastery in emerging, and mastery in reviewing. He adverts to the first jhana where, when, and for as long as he wishes. He has no difficulty in adverting. Thus it is mastery in adverting. He attains the first jhana where he has no difficulty in attaining. Thus it is mastery in attaining, and all the rest should be quoted in detail. The explanation of the meaning here is this. When he emerges from the first jhana and first of all adverts to the applied thought, then, next to the adverting that arose interrupting the life continuum, either 4 or 5 impulsions impel with that applied thought as their object. Then there are 2 life continuum. Then there is adverting with the sustained thought as its object, and followed by impulsions in the way just stated. When he is able to prolong his conscious process uninterruptedly in this way with the 5 jhana factors, then his mastery of adverting is successful. But this mastery is found at its acme of perfection in the Blessed One's twin marvel, or for others on the aforesaid occasions. There is no quicker mastery in adverting than that. The Venerable Maha-Moggallana's ability to enter upon jhana quickly, as in the taming of the royal Naga serpent, Nandopananda is called mastery in attaining. Ability to remain in jhana for a moment, consisting in exactly a finger snap, or exactly 10 finger snaps, is called mastery in resolving, steadying the duration. Ability to emerge quickly in the same way is called mastery in emerging. The story of the elder Buddharakkhita may be told in order to illustrate both these last. 8 years after his admission to the community, that elder was sitting in the midst of 30,000 bhikkhus possessed of supernormal powers who had gathered to attend upon the sickness of the elder Mahadrahanagutta at Therambattala. He saw a royal supana, bird, swooping down from the sky intending to seize an attendant royal Naga serpent as he was getting rice gruel accepted for the elder. The elder Buddharakkhita created a rock meanwhile, and seizing the royal Naga by the arm, he pushed him inside it. The royal supana gave the rock a blow and made off. The senior elder remarked, "Friends, if Rakkhita had not been there, we should all have been put to shame. Mastery in reviewing is described in the same way as mastery in adverting, for the reviewing impulsions are in fact those next to the adverting mentioned there. When he has once acquired mastery in these 5 ways, then on emerging from the now familiar first jhana, he can regard the flaws in it in this way. This attainment is threatened by the nearness of the hindrances, and its factors are weakened by the grossness of the applied and sustained thought. He can bring the second jhana to mind as quieter, and so end his attachment to the first jhana and set about doing what is needed for attaining the second. When he has emerged from the first jhana, applied and sustained, thought appear gross to him as he reviews the jhana factors with mindfulness and full awareness, while happiness and bliss and unification of mind appear peaceful. Then, as he brings that same sign to mind as earth, earth, again and again, with the purpose of abandoning the gross factors and obtaining the peaceful factors, now the second jhana will arise. There arises in him mind door adverting with that same Earth Kasina as its object, interrupting the life continuum. After that, either 4 or 5 impulsions impel on that same object, the last one of which is an impulsion of the fine material sphere belonging to the second jhana. The rest are of the sense sphere of the kinds already stated. And at this point, with the stilling of applied and sustained thought, he enters upon and dwells in the second jhana, which has internal confidence and singleness of mind, without applied thought, without sustained thought, with happiness and bliss born of concentration. And so he has attained the second jhana, which abandons 2 factors, possesses 3 factors, is good in 3 ways, possesses 10 characteristics, and is of the Earth Kasina. Herein, with the stilling of applied and sustained thought, with the stilling, with the surmounting of these 2, namely, applied thought and sustained thought, with their non-manifestation at the moment of the second jhana, is what is meant. Herein, although none of the states belonging to the first jhana exist in the second jhana, for the contact, in the first jhana are one, and here they are, another, it should be understood all the same that the phrase, with the stilling of applied and sustained thought, is expressed in this way, in order to indicate that the attaining of the other jhanas, beginning with that of the second from the first, is effected by the surmounting of the gross factor in each case. Internal. Here one's own internal is intended, but that much is actually stated in the Visuddhimagga too with the words internally in oneself. And since one's own internal is intended, the meaning here is this: born in oneself, generated in one's own continuity. Confidence. It is faith that is called confidence. The jhana has confidence because it is associated with confidence as a cloth has blue color because it is associated with blue color. Or alternatively, that jhana is stated to have confidence because it makes the mind confident with the confidence possessed by it and by stilling the disturbance created by applied and sustained thought. And with this conception of the meaning, the word construction must be taken as confidence of mind. But with the first mentioned conception of the meaning, the words of mind must be construed with singleness. Here is the construction of the meaning in that case. Unique it comes up, udeti, thus it is single, eko di. The meaning is, it comes up as the superlative, the best, because it is not overtopped by applied and sustained thought, for the best is called unique in the world. Or it is permissible to say that when deprived of applied and sustained thought it is unique, without companion. Or alternatively, it evokes associated states, thus it is an evoker. The meaning is, it arouses. And that is unique, ek, in the sense of best, and it is an evoker, thus it is a unique evoker, ikodi crower single. This is a term for concentration. Then, since the second jhana gives existingness to augments, this single thing, it gives singleness, ekodibhava. But as this single thing is a mind's, not a being's or a soul's, So singleness of mind is said. It might be asked, but does not this faith exist in the first jhana too? And also this concentration with the name of the single thing? Then why is only this second jhana said to have confidence and singleness of mind? It may be replied as follows. It is because that first jhana is not fully confident owing to the disturbance created by applied and sustained thought, like water ruffled by ripples and wavelets. That is why, although faith does exist in it, it is not called confidence. And there too concentration is not fully evident because of the lack of full confidence. That is why it is not called singleness there. But in this second jhana faith is strong, having got a footing in the absence of the impediments of applied and sustained thought. And concentration is also evident through having strong faith as its companion. That may be understood as the reason why only this jhana is described in this way. But that much is actually stated in the Vibhaghosa too with the words, confidence is faith, having faith, trust, full confidence. Singleness of mind is steadiness of consciousness, right concentration. And this commentary on the meaning should not be so understood as to conflict with the meaning stated in that way, but on the contrary, so as to agree and concur with it. Without applied thought, without sustained thought, since it has been abandoned by development, there is no applied thought in this, or of this jhana. Thus it is without applied thought. The same explanation applies to sustained thought. Also it is said in the Vibhaghosa, so this applied thought and this sustained thought are quieted, quietened, stilled, set at rest, set quite at rest, done away with, quite done away with, dried up, quite dried up, made an end of. Hence it is said, without applied thought, without sustained thought. Here it may be asked, has not this meaning already been established by the words, with the stilling of applied and sustained thought? So why is it said again, without applied thought, without sustained thoughts? It may be replied, yes, that meaning has already been established, but this does not indicate that meaning. Did we not say earlier? The phrase, with the stilling of applied and sustained thought, is expressed in this way in order to indicate that the act of attaining the other jhanas, beginning with that of the second from the first, is effected by the surmounting of the gross factor in each case. Besides, this confidence comes about with the act of stilling, not the darkness of defilement, but the applied and sustained thought. And the singleness comes about, not as in access jhana, with the abandoning of the hindrances, nor as in the first jhana with the manifestation of the factors, but with the act of stilling the applied and sustained thought. So that first clause indicates the cause of the confidence in singleness. In the same way, this jhana is without applied thought and without sustained thought, not as in the third and fourth jhanas or as in eye consciousness, with just absence, but with the actual act of stilling the applied and sustained thought. So that first clause also indicates the cause of the state, without applied and sustained thought. It does not indicate the bare absence of applied and sustained thought. The bare absence of applied and sustained thought is indicated by this second clause, namely, without applied thought, without sustained thought. Consequently, it needs to be stated, notwithstanding that the first has already been stated. Born of concentration, born of the first jhana concentration, or born of associated concentration, is the meaning. Herein, although the first was born of associated concentration too, still it is only this concentration that is quite worthy to be called concentration, because of its complete confidence and extreme immobility due to absence of disturbance by applied and sustained thought. So only this jhana is called born of concentration, and that is in order to recommend it. With happiness and bliss is as already explained. Second in numerical series. Also second because entered upon second. Then it was also said above which abandons two factors, possesses three factors. Herein, the abandoning of two factors should be understood as the abandoning of applied thought and sustained thought. But while the hindrances are abandoned at the moment of the access of the first jhana, in the case of this jhana, the applied thought and sustained thought are not abandoned at the moment of its access. It is only at the moment of actual absorption that the jhana arises without them. Hence, they are called its factors of abandoning. Its possession of three factors should be understood as the arising of the three, that is, happiness, bliss, and unification of mind. So when it is said in the Vibhaghosa, jhana, confidence, happiness, bliss, unification of mind, this is said figuratively in order to show that jhana with its equipment. But, excepting the confidence, this jhana has literally three factors, qua factors, that have attained to the characteristic of lighting, according as it is said. What is jhana of three factors on that occasion? It is happiness, bliss, unification of mind. The rest is, as in the case of the first jhana. Once this has been obtained in this way, and he has mastery in the 5 ways already described, then on emerging from the now familiar second jhana, he can regard the flaws in it thus. This attainment is threatened by the nearness of applied and sustained thought. Whatever there is in it of happiness, of mental excitement, proclaims its grossness, and its factors are weakened by the grossness of the happiness so expressed. He can bring the third jhana to mind as quieter, and so end his attachment to the second jhana and set about doing what is needed for attaining the third. When he has emerged from the second, jhana happiness appears gross to him as he reviews the jhana factors with mindfulness and full awareness, while bliss and unification appear peaceful. Then as he brings that same sign to mind as earth, earth again and again, with the purpose of abandoning the gross factor and obtaining the peaceful factors, knowing now the third jhana will arise, there arises in him mind door adverting with that same Earth Kasina as its object, interrupting the life continuum. After that, either 4 or 5 impulsions impel on that same object, the last one of which is an impulsion of the fine material sphere belonging to the third jhana. The rest are of the kinds already stated, and at this point, with the fading away of happiness as well, he dwells in equanimity, and mindful and fully aware. He feels bliss with his body. He enters upon and dwells in the third jhana, on account of which the noble ones announce, he dwells in bliss, who has equanimity and is mindful. And so he has attained the third jhana, which abandons one factor, possesses 2 factors, is good in 3 ways, possesses 10 characteristics, and is of the Earth Kasina. Herein, with the fading away of happiness as well, fading away is distaste for, or surmounting of, happiness of the kind already described. But the words as well, between the two, have the meaning of a conjunction. They conjoin to them either the word stilling, or the expression, the stilling of applied and sustained thought. Herein, when taken as conjoining stilling, the construction to be understood is with the fading away and, what is more, with the stilling of happiness. With this construction, fading away has the meaning of distaste, so the meaning can be regarded as with distaste for and with the stilling of happiness. But when taken as conjoining the words stilling of applied and sustained thought, then the construction to be understood is with the fading of happiness, and further, with the stilling of applied and sustained thought. With this construction, fading away has the meaning of surmounting, so this meaning can be regarded as with the surmounting of happiness and with the stilling of applied and sustained thought. Of course, applied and sustained thought have already been stilled in the second jhana, too. However, this is said in order to show the path to this third jhana and in order to recommend it. For when with the stilling of applied and sustained thought is said, it is declared that the path to this jhana is necessarily by the stilling of applied and sustained thought. And just as, although mistaken view of individuality, are not abandoned in the attaining of the third noble path, but in the first, yet when it is recommended by describing their abandonment thus, with the abandoning of the 5 lower fetters, then it awakens eagerness in those trying to attain that third noble path. So too when the stilling of applied and sustained thought is mentioned, though they are not actually stilled here, but in the second, this is a recommendation. Hence the meaning expressed is this: with the surmounting of happiness and with the stilling of applied and sustained thought. He dwells in equanimity. It watches things as they arise. Thus, it is equanimity, upekkha or onlooking. It sees fairly, sees without partiality, is the meaning. A possessor of the third jhana is said to dwell in equanimity, since he possesses equanimity that is clear, abundant, and sound. Equanimity is of 10 kinds. 6-factored equanimity. Equanimity as a divine abiding. Equanimity as an enlightenment factor. Equanimity of energy. Equanimity about formations. Equanimity as a feeling. Equanimity about insight. Equanimity as specific neutrality. Equanimity of jhana and equanimity of purification. Herein, 6-factored equanimity is a name for the equanimity in one whose cankers are destroyed. It is the mode of non-abandonment of the natural state of purity, when desirable or undesirable objects of the 6 kinds come into focus in the 6 doors described thus. Here a bhikkhu whose cankers are destroyed is neither glad nor sad. On seeing a visibly object with the he dwells in equanimity, mindful and fully aware. Equanimity as a divine abiding is a name for equanimity consisting in the mode of neutrality towards beings discrepitus. He dwells intent upon one quarter with his heart endued with equanimity. Equanimity as an enlightenment factor is a name for equanimity consisting in the mode of neutrality in connascent states described thus. He develops the equanimity enlightenment factor depending on relinquishment. Equanimity of energy is a name for the equanimity otherwise known as neither over-strenuous nor over-lax energy described. Thus, from time to time he brings to mind the sign of equanimity. Equanimity about formations is a name for equanimity consisting in neutrality, about apprehending reflection and composure regarding the hindrances, etc., described thus. How many kinds of equanimity about formations arise through concentration? How many kinds of equanimity about formations arise through insight? 8 kinds of equanimity about formations arise through concentration. 10 kinds of equanimity about formations arise through insight. Equanimity as a feeling is a name for the equanimity known as neither pain nor pleasure described thus. On the occasion on which a sense-sphere profitable consciousness has arisen accompanied by equanimity. Equanimity about insight is a name for equanimity consisting in neutrality, about investigation described thus. What exists, what has become, that he abandons, and he obtains equanimity. Equanimity as specific neutrality is a name for equanimity consisting in the equal efficiency of connascent states. It is contained among the or whatever states, beginning with zeal. Equanimity of jhana is a name for equanimity producing impartiality towards even the highest bliss described thus. He dwells in equanimity. Purifying equanimity is a name for equanimity purified of all opposition, and so consisting in uninterestedness in stilling opposition, described thus. The 4th jhana, which has mindfulness purified by equanimity. Herein, 6-factored equanimity. Equanimity as a divine abiding. Equanimity as an enlightenment factor. Equanimity as specific neutrality. Equanimity of jhana and purifying equanimity are one in meaning, that is, equanimity as specific neutrality. Their difference, however, is one of position, like the difference in a single being as a boy, a youth, an adult, a general, a king, and so on. Therefore, of these it should be understood that equanimity as an enlightenment factor are not found where there is 6-factored equanimity, or that 6-factored equanimity are not found where there is equanimity as an enlightenment factor. And just as these have one meaning, so also equanimity about formations and equanimity about insight have one meaning too, for they are simply understanding classed in these 2 ways according to function. Just as, When a man has seen a snake go into his house in the evening and has hunted for it with a forked stick, and then when he has seen it lying in the grain store and has looked to discover whether it is actually a snake or not, and then, by seeing 3 marks, has no more doubt, and so there is neutrality in him about further investigating whether or not it is a snake. So, too, when a man has begun insight, and he sees with insight knowledge the 3 characteristics, then there is neutrality in him about further investigating the impermanence of formations, and that neutrality is called equanimity about insight. But just as, when the man has caught hold of the snake securely with the forked stick and thinks, "How shall I get rid of the snake without hurting it or getting bitten by it?" Then, as he is seeking only the way to get rid of it, there is neutrality in him about the catching hold of it. So too, when a man, through seeking the 3 characteristics, sees the 3 kinds of becoming as if burning, then there is neutrality in him about catching hold of formations, and that neutrality is called equanimity about formations. So when equanimity about insight is established, equanimity about formations is established too. But it is divided into 2 in this way according to function. In other words, according to neutrality about investigating and about catching hold. Equanimity of energy and equanimity as feeling are different both from each other and from the rest. So, of these kinds of equanimity, it is equanimity of jhana that is intended here. That has the characteristic of neutrality. Its function is to be unconcerned. It is manifested as uninterestedness. Its proximate cause is the fading away of happiness. Here it may be said, is this not simply equanimity as specific neutrality in the meaning? And that exists in the first and second jhanas as well. So this clause, he dwells in equanimity, ought to be stated of those also. Why is it not? It may be replied, because its function is unevident there, since it is overshadowed by applied thought and the rest. But it appears here with a quite evident function, with head erect as it were, because it is not overshadowed by applied thought and sustained thought and happiness. That is why it is stated here. The commentary on the meaning of the clause, he dwells in equanimity, is thus completed in all its aspects. Now as to mindful and fully aware, here he remembers, thus he is mindful. He has full awareness, thus he is fully aware. This is mindfulness and full awareness stated as personal attributes. Herein, mindfulness has the characteristic of remembering. Its function is not to forget. It is manifested as guarding. Full awareness has the characteristic of non-confusion. Its function is to investigate, judge. It is manifested as scrutiny. Herein, although this mindfulness and this full awareness exist in the earlier jhanas as well, for one who is forgetful and not fully aware does not attain even access, let alone absorption. Yet because of the comparative grossness of those jhanas, the mind's going is easy there, like that of a man on level ground, and so the functions of mindfulness and full awareness are not evident in them. But it is only stated here because the subtlety of this jhana, which is due to the abandoning of the gross factors, requires that the mind's going always includes the functions of mindfulness and full awareness, like that of a man on a razor's edge. What is more, just as a calf that follows a cow returns to the cow when taken away from her if not prevented, so too, when this third jhana is led away from happiness, it would return to happiness if not prevented by mindfulness and full awareness, and would rejoin happiness. And besides, beings are greedy for bliss, and this kind of bliss is exceedingly sweet since there is none greater. But here there is non-greed for the bliss, owing to the influence of the mindfulness and full awareness, not for any other reason. And so it should also be understood that it is stated only here in order to emphasize this meaning too. Now, as to the clause, he feels bliss with his body. Here, although in one actually possessed of the third jhana there is no concern about feeling bliss, nevertheless, he would feel the bliss associated with his mental body, and after emerging from the jhana, He would also feel bliss since his material body would have been affected by the exceedingly superior matter originated by that bliss associated with the mental body. It is in order to point to this meaning that the words, "he feels bliss with his body," are said. Now, as to the clause, that, on account of which the noble ones announce, "he dwells in bliss, who has equanimity and is mindful," here it is the jhana, on account of which as cause, on account of which as reason, the noble ones, that is to say, the enlightened ones, announce, teach, declare, establish, reveal, expound, explain, clarify. That person who possesses the third jhana, they praise, is what is intended. Why? Because he dwells in bliss who has equanimity and is mindful. He enters upon and dwells in that third jhana, is how the construction should be understood here. But why do they praise him thus? Because he is worthy of praise.
For this man is worthy of praise, since he has equanimity towards the third jhana, though it possesses exceedingly sweet bliss, and has reached the perfection of bliss, and he is not drawn towards it by a liking for the bliss, and he is mindful with the mindfulness established in order to prevent the arising of happiness, and he feels with his mental body the undefiled bliss, beloved of noble ones, cultivated by noble ones. Because he is worthy of praise in this way, it should be understood, noble ones praise him with the words, "he dwells in bliss who has equanimity and is mindful," thus declaring the special qualities that are worthy of praise. Third, it is the third in the numerical series, and it is third because it is entered upon third. Then it was said, which abandons one factor, possesses two factors. Here the abandoning of the one factor should be understood as the abandoning of happiness. But that is abandoned only at the moment of absorption, as applied thought and sustained thought are at that of the second jhana. Hence it is called its factor of abandoning. The possession of the two factors should be understood as the arising of the two, namely bliss and unification. So when it is said in the Vibhagga, jhana, equanimity, mindfulness, full awareness, bliss, unification of mind, this is said figuratively in order to show that jhana with its equipment. But, accepting the equanimity and mindfulness and full awareness, this jhana has literally only two factors, qua factors that have attained to the characteristic of lighting. According as it is said, what is the jhana of two factors on that occasion? It is bliss and unification of mind. The rest is as in the case of the first jhana, 0. Once this has been obtained in this way, and once he has mastery in the 5 ways already described, then on emerging from the now familiar third jhana, he can regard the flaws in it thus. This attainment is threatened by the nearness of happiness. Whatever there is in it of mental concern about bliss proclaims its grossness, and its factors are weakened by the grossness of the bliss so expressed. He can bring the fourth jhana to mind as quieter and so end his attachment to the third jhana and set about doing what is needed for attaining the fourth. When he has emerged from the third jhana, the bliss, in other words, the mental joy, appears gross to him as he reviews the jhana factors with mindfulness and full awareness, while the equanimity as feeling and the unification of mind appear peaceful. Then, as he brings that same sign to mind as earth, earth, again and again, with the purpose of abandoning the gross factor and obtaining the peaceful factors, knowing, now the fourth jhana will arise, there arises in him mind door adverting with that same Earth Kasina as its object, interrupting the life continuum. After that, either 4 or 5 impulsions impel on that same object, the last one of which is an impulsion of the fine material sphere belonging to the fourth jhana. The rest are of the kinds already stated. But there is this difference. Blissful, pleasant feeling is not a condition, as repetition condition, for neither painful nor pleasant feeling, and the preliminary work must be aroused in the case of the fourth jhana, with neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Consequently, these consciousnesses of the preliminary work are associated with neither painful nor pleasant feeling, and here happiness vanishes simply owing to their association with equanimity. The fourth jhana. And at this point, With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of joy and grief, he enters upon and dwells in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure and has purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. And so he has attained the fourth jhana, which abandons one factor, possesses two factors, is good in three ways, possesses 10 characteristics, and is of the Earth Kasina herein, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, with the abandoning of bodily pleasure and bodily pain, with the previous, which took place before, not in the moment of the fourth jhana, disappearance of joy and grief, with the previous disappearance of the two, that is, mental bliss, pleasure, and mental pain, with the abandoning is what is meant. But when does the abandoning of these take place? At the moment of access of the four jhanas. For mental joy is only abandoned at the moment of the fourth jhana access, while bodily pain, mental grief, and bodily bliss, pleasure, are abandoned respectively at the moments of access of the first, second, and third jhanas. So although the order in which they are abandoned is not actually mentioned, nevertheless the abandoning of the pleasure, pain, joy, and grief is stated here according to the order in which the faculties are summarized in the Visuddhimagga. But if these are only abandoned at the moments of access of the several jhanas, why is their cessation said to take place in the jhana itself in the following passage? And where does the arisen pain faculty cease without remainder? Here, bhikkhus, quite secluded from sense desires, secluded from unprofitable things, a bhikkhu enters upon and dwells in the first jhana, which is born of seclusion. It is here that the arisen pain faculty ceases without remainder. Where does the arisen grief faculty cease without remainder? In the second jhana. Where does the arisen pleasure faculty? Where does the arisen joy faculty cease without remainder? Here, bhikkhus, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of joy and grief, a bhikkhu enters upon and dwells in the fourth jhana, which has mindfulness purified by equanimity. It is here that the arisen joy faculty ceases without remainder. It is said in that way there referring to reinforced cessation. For in the first jhana, it is their reinforced cessation, not just their cessation, that takes place. At the moment of access, it is just their cessation, not their reinforced cessation, that takes place. For accordingly, during the first jhana access, which has multiple adverting, there could be re-arising of the bodily pain faculty, ein due to contact with gadflies, flies, etc., or the discomfort of an uneven seat, though that pain faculty had already ceased, but not so during absorption. Or else, though it has ceased during access, it has not absolutely ceased there since it is not quite beaten out by opposition. But during absorption, the whole body is showered with bliss, owing to pervasion by happiness. And the pain faculty has absolutely ceased in one whose body is showered with bliss, since it is beaten out then by opposition. And during the second jhana access too, which has multiple advertings, there could be re-arising of the mental grief faculty, although it had already ceased there, because it arises when there is bodily weariness and mental vexation, which have applied thought and sustained thought as their condition, but it does not arise when applied and sustained thought are absent. When it arises, it does so in the presence of applied and sustained thought, and they are not abandoned in the second jhana access. But this is not so in the second jhana itself, because its conditions are abandoned there. Likewise, in the third jhana access, there could be re-arising of the abandoned bodily pleasure faculty in one whose body was pervaded by the superior materiality, originated by the consciousness associated with the happiness. But not so in the third jhana itself. For in the third jhana, the happiness that is a condition for the bodily bliss, pleasure, has ceased entirely. Likewise, in the fourth jhana access, there could be re-arising of the abandoned mental joy faculty because of its nearness and because it has not been properly surmounted owing to the absence of equanimity brought to absorption strength. But not so in the fourth jhana itself. And that is why in each case the words without remainder are included thus. It is here that the arisen pain faculty ceases without remainder. Here it may be asked, then if these kinds of feeling are abandoned in the access in this way, why are they brought in here? It is done so that they can be readily grasped. For the neither painful nor pleasant feeling described here by the words, which has neither pain nor pleasure, is subtle, hard to recognize, and not readily grasped. So just as when a cattle herd wants to catch a refractory ox that cannot be caught at all by approaching it, he collects all the cattle into one pen and lets them out one by one. And then, he says, that is it, catch it. And so it gets caught as well. So too the Blessed One has collected all these 5 kinds of feeling together so that they can be grasped readily. For when they are shown collected together in this way, then what is not bodily pleasure, bliss, or bodily pain or mental joy or mental grief can still be grasped in this way. This is neither painful nor pleasant feeling.
Besides, this may be understood as said in order to show the condition for the neither painful nor pleasant mind deliverance. For the abandoning of bodily pain are conditions for that, according as it is said. There are 4 conditions, friend, for the attainment of the neither painful nor pleasant mind deliverance. Here, friend, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain and with the previous disappearance of joy and grief, a bhikkhu enters upon and dwells in the 4th jhana, equanimity. These are the 4 conditions for the attainment of the neither painful nor pleasant mind deliverance. Or alternatively, just as, although mistaken view of individuality have already been abandoned in the earlier paths, they are nevertheless mentioned as abandoned in the description of the 3rd path for the purpose of recommending it. So too these kinds of feeling can be understood as mentioned here for the purpose of recommending this jhana. Or alternatively, they can be understood as mentioned for the purpose of showing that greed and hate are very far away, owing to the removal of their conditions. For of these, pleasure, bliss, is a condition for joy, and joy for greed. Pain is a condition for grief, and grief for hate. So with the removal of pleasure, bliss, greed and hate are very far away since they are removed along with their conditions, which has neither pain nor pleasure, no pain owing to absence of pain, no pleasure owing to absence of pleasure, bliss. By this he indicates the 3rd kind of feeling that is in opposition both to pain and to pleasure, not the mere absence of pain and pleasure. This 3rd kind of feeling, named neither pain nor pleasure, is also called equanimity. It has the characteristic of experiencing what is contrary to both the desirable and the undesirable. Its function is neutral. Its manifestation is unevident. Its proximate cause should be understood as the cessation of pleasure, bliss, and has purity of mindfulness due to equanimity, has purity of mindfulness brought about by equanimity. For the mindfulness in this jhana is quite purified, and its purification is effected by equanimity, not by anything else. That is why it is said to have purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. Also it is said in the Visuddhimagga, this mindfulness is cleared, purified, clarified by equanimity. Hence it is said to have purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. And the equanimity due to which there comes to be this purity of mindfulness should be understood as specific neutrality in meaning. And not only mindfulness is purified by it here, but also all associated states. However, the teaching is given under the heading of mindfulness. Herein, this equanimity exists in the 3 lower jhanas too. But just as, although a crescent moon exists by day, but is not purified or clear since it is outshone by the sun's radiance in the daytime, or since it is deprived of the night, which is its ally owing to gentleness and owing to helpfulness to it, so too, this crescent moon of equanimity consisting in specific neutrality exists in the 1st jhana, but it is not purified since it is outshone by the glare of the opposing states consisting in applied thought, and since it is deprived of the night of equanimity as feeling for its ally, and because it is not purified, the connascent mindfulness and other states are not purified either, like the unpurified crescent moon's radiance by day. That is why no one among these, first 3 jhanas, is said to have purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. But here this crescent moon consisting in specific neutrality is utterly pure, because it is not outshone by the glare of the opposing states consisting in applied thought, and because it has the night of equanimity as feeling for its ally, and since it is purified, The connascent mindfulness and other states are purified and clear also, like the purified crescent moon's radiance. That, it should be understood, is why only this jhana is said to have purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. Fourth, it is fourth in numerical series, and it is fourth because it is entered upon fourth. Then it was said, which abandons one factor, possesses two factors. Here the abandoning of the one factor should be understood as the abandoning of joy. But that joy is actually abandoned in the first impulsions of the same cognitive series. Hence it is called its factor of abandoning. The possession of the two factors should be understood as the arising of the two, namely, equanimity, as feeling and unification of mind. The rest is as stated in the case of the first jhana. This, in the first place, is according to the fourfold reckoning of jhana, the fivefold reckoning of jhana. When, however, he is developing fivefold jhana, then, on emerging from the now familiar first jhana, he can regard the flaws in it in this way. This attainment is threatened by the nearness of the hindrances, and its factors are weakened by the grossness of applied thought. He can bring the second jhana to mind as quieter, and so end his attachment to the first jhana, and set about doing what is needed for attaining the second. Now, he emerges from the first jhana mindfully and fully aware, and only applied thought appears gross to him as he reviews the jhana factors, while the sustained thought appear peaceful. Then, as he brings that same sign to mind as earth, earth, again and again, with the purpose of abandoning the gross factor and obtaining the peaceful factors, the second jhana arises in him in the way already described. Its factor of abandoning is applied thought only. The four beginning with sustained thought are the factors that it possesses. The rest is as already stated. When this has been obtained in this way, and once he has mastery in the 5 ways already described, then, on emerging from the now familiar second jhana, he can regard the flaws in it in this way. This attainment is threatened by the nearness of applied thought, and its factors are weakened by the grossness of sustained thought. He can bring the third jhana to mind as quieter, and so end his attachment to the second jhana and set about doing what is needed for attaining the third. Now he emerges from the second jhana mindfully and fully aware. Only sustained thought appears gross to him as he reviews the jhana factors, while happiness appear peaceful. Then, as he brings that same sign to mind as earth, earth, again and again with the purpose of abandoning the gross factor and obtaining the peaceful factors, the third jhana arises in him in the way already described. Its factor of abandoning is sustained thought only. The 3 beginning with happiness, as in the second jhana in the fourfold reckoning, are the factors that it possesses. The rest is as already stated. So that which is the second in the fourfold reckoning becomes the second and third in the fivefold reckoning, by being divided into 2. And those which are the third and fourth in the former reckoning become the fourth and fifth in this reckoning. The first remains the first in each case. The description of the Earth Kasina, in the treatise on the development of concentration in the path of purification, composed for the purpose of gladdening good people.